You are listening to Rechurched, a podcast aimed at instigating Christians to be Christian.
All right, guys, you already know this is Matthew Mayer. If you've tuned in, this is Rechurched podcast. I'm not joined by my co-host Ethan Hoover. I'm actually joined with three special guests, and I'll introduce them momentarily. But by the time this posts, by the time we send this out on our platforms, we will have already had our hot mic Q&A at Landmark Church, where we answer questions, often with a theme. I am often joined by Sean Hyland. He's the Director of Advocacy for the New Jersey Family Policy Center. He's a friend of the ministry. Love co-laboring with him. He's a voice of clarity in the midst of so much confusion. But the theme was Faith on the Front Lines. And the subtitle, which if you guys listen to this podcast, you know I'm very passionate about. The subtitle was Church and State. Now you already know there's a lie that has been weaved through so many minds that has people believing in separation of church and state. But here's how this goes. In season 3, we teased out the book that I was able to write entitled Discerning the Devil's Playbook. Play number 1, contradict the truth. Play number 2, control the news. Play number 3, bring conflict to groups. Play number 4, cleaning up the spoils of war, convert the youth. You guys remember that. We took our time. And one of the things I saw upon research, not only in Nazi Germany, not only in the Bible, you see there's an attempt by the enemy to cause Christians and believers to be on the sidelines, not on the front lines. And the lie is separation of church and state. And here's how this plays out. Separation of church and state always leads to submission of church to state. And then submission of church to state always rolls over to suppression of church by state. And we cannot allow that to happen. So, church and state, let's talk about the intersection between church and state. Let's talk about the relationship between church and state and how when we're in our rightful lanes and we work together to be the light in a dark world, we can push back that darkness and we can stand for righteousness. So with that being said, a long introduction to introduce to you 3 special guests I'm honored to have here at Landmark Church. And I'm going to introduce them by name, and then I'm going to ask them if they would be willing to introduce themselves and maybe share with our audience a little bit about yourself, what you are currently doing, and anything else that you feel is necessary to shape this conversation. So I'm joined with Assemblyman Antoine McClellan, Assemblyman Eric Simonson, and Commissioner Melanie Collette. Welcome to Rechurched podcast, guys.
Thanks for having us.
I appreciate it. Let me start with you, Antoine, Assemblyman McClellan.
Yes.
Tell us what you're currently doing and maybe help us understand why you're passionate about the work that you've been called to.
Okay. I'm currently representing the 1st Legislative District in this state, which includes Cape May County, most of Cumberland County, and a little bit of Atlantic County. But the most important thing that I'm doing is we want to make sure that everybody understands that Legislative District 1 is the most important part of this state. And what we do in this state is contingent on the fact that Legislative District 1 contributes financially to this state. And we want to make sure that the state understands that as well. So what we put into the state, we want to make sure we get back from the state. And that's currently not happening, and it hasn't happened since before we were elected in office in 2020. So that fight is going to continue. And the other fight that we want to make sure we continue is that our faith is seen throughout this state. And it's always about God, family, and community. And we're going to continue to be about God, family, and community. And I think that's lacking in the state. And that's why we're part of a prayer caucus in the State House. And I think that's very important, not only to us, but to other legislators as well. And we're going to continue to fight for our God and make sure he's represented. And we're going to continue to fight for our youth. And also we're going to continue to fight for our families in our communities.
Those are pillars. Those are institutions that God has founded, right? So while working with state, and you guys have a very important and critical role to play there, I think, as I've introed, there is this misunderstanding on how both those lanes can work together to make sure that these God-given institutions and rights are not corrupted by the natural tendencies of man, which is sin. And what you guys are doing, and your voice specifically, Assemblyman, is very clear. And I appreciate that work on the front lines. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Commissioner Collette.
Yes.
It is my privilege and pleasure to meet you face to face.
Likewise.
Formally, and have been able to see what the Lord is doing in your life from a distance. I know you have been invited onto national platforms, which is amazing to see for South Jersey's sake. And you're working with amazing guys here. Introduce yourself and tell us what we need to know.
So, to your point, I'm Commissioner Melanie Collette. I am the Deputy Chief of Staff to Assemblyman McClellan and Assemblyman Simonson. And I've been doing it for about 2 years and left what I view to be as really God having saved me from the classroom. I'd been in education for 24 years. It was an absolute spiritual cesspool. And anybody who knows me, and I'm sure the Assemblyman will co-sign it, I have a hard time keeping my mouth shut. And if you see me on national TV, I'm sure you agree with that as well. And so being in a public school system that really believed that the government is supposed to be our God,
right,
and that they're supposed to take precedent over family, over parents, strongly just conflicted with everything that I believed in, and I said so on a regular basis. And so it got to be too much after a while, and so I left, and I'm now working with the Assemblyman, and then was fortunate enough to be elected by the good people of Cape May County, New Jersey, where I get to serve there and hopefully continue to help out with the beauty and the success and the comfort and the safety that is Cape May County.
Commissioner, we appreciate your voice, and I love how the Lord allowed you to see. He opened your eyes to see that world. And a lot of the times, the most impactful people were once in the midst of those types of cesspools, as you said, and then you come back with eyes to make a difference there. That's what matters most. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us. And finally, we also have Assemblyman Simonson.
Save the best for last.
That's it. Take it away.
I think Antoine covered a lot of what we do and who we cover in our district. I've been in education for 32 years as a teacher, a supervisor, a vice principal, athletic director, and there's a lot to see, with all age groups, and as someone who travels around the state like we do now, and someone who grew up here in our special little area here in Cape May County. We love the area that we represent in Cape May, Cumberland, Atlantic County. But again, as someone being in the education system for so long, and seeing our core standards, when we talk about phys ed and health, a comprehensive health education and life skills and career skills and math, science, language arts, et cetera, et cetera. Parents are allowed to ask what their kids are being taught, and it seems like we really got away from that. And I think people have short memories sometimes, and they forget that the most important things. And one of my favorite quotes is Frederick Douglass says, it's easier to build strong children than to fix broken men.
Right.
And that's what we started doing. And, I know we're going to talk about the Bill 3204 that Antoine and I are co-sponsored, but, we look back, our Constitution is built on the Bible.
That's right.
On the Word.
Yep.
And, I think faith is so important. And I'm athletic director now. I'm still an athlete. When you see these athletes after the Super Bowl or after a World Series thank the Lord for the gifts they've been given, and the life that they've been given, basically, to play a sport, it does my heart good.
That's right.
But yeah, I think we've definitely gotten off track, especially the last several years, and that's time for people like us, like Melanie, Antoine, and myself, and other elected officials, because unfortunately it comes down to us or school board members. They're elected officials.
That's right.
To fix it.
I think it's easy to assess or diagnose how we arrived here. For some time, decades in the making, Christians, believers, began to remove themselves from public involvement. And that leaves a vacuum, does it not? And that vacuum is going to be filled. And I feel like we're playing catch up, because the conversation right now, and that's what we're going to talk about, is whether or not parents, let's call them the rightful owners of their children by God's grace, because they're gifts, not the state's, whether or not parents should be made aware of certain curriculum changes, curriculum additions. And I think that's why this specific bill, and you already mentioned it, Bill A3204, it's built upon transparency. And that is a word that is seemingly under attack right now.
Yes.
So I'll start with you, Assemblyman McClellan. What brought you to co-sponsor a bill like this, number one, and why do you believe that transparency between the schools, the state, and the families, the parents, is so critical?
What brought me to sponsor it is that I saw what was going on, prior to COVID and through COVID, when you were allowing teachers to keep secrets from parents. And that's a problem. The teacher is not fully invested in that kid as more than the parent is. So if my Johnny wanted to be Jeanette, I need to know that.
Unbelievable.
I don't need to find that out at a band practice, or if I'm reading through, their graduation certificate or something like that they decided to change their name and I don't know anything about that. That's a problem. And I don't understand why schools don't see that as a problem. I don't understand why administrators don't see that as a problem, because you wouldn't want your child to be doing the same thing that you're allowing other people's children to do. So I felt it was necessary for this bill to be heard and to be signed into law. Hopefully that can happen. That we don't keep any secrets. And if there's books that I don't want my kid to read, I should know that.
Right.
And I should be the one that decides what my child is going to read. If I want my child to read the Bible, I'm going to make that decision.
Right.
I don't want somebody else to make that decision, because that investment is not there. I have to take care of them after they're 18. And I started taking care of them when we brought them into this world. So we need to make sure that our families are involved in the school system and what they're trying to teach our kids.
You know what I've said on numerous occasions about 2020, which I believe was a line of demarcation where, and here's how I frame it, the world was wearing masks as God was unmasking the world. And it was during that season where a lot of parents, whether they were an earshot away from the Zoom meeting, they began to say, wait, what did I just hear? Or the assignments were now accessible to the parents, and they're reading these books and they're going, wait, what are you teaching my child? And I believe the enemy always overplays his hand.
Yes.
And I think that is then the moment where parents began to get more involved and began to push back, and people, legislators like yourselves, began to say, hey, how can we begin to shine light on this, number one, and number two, put our stake in the ground for God, for family, and for righteousness. So this is New Jersey, and I'm sure it's been an uphill battle based on the governor's stance and the attorney general's, and I want to talk about that, what's happening there, but we'll get around to that. Commissioner, what are you seeing, not only on the state levels, but anything on the national level where you're being invited to address a lot of these issues on Newsmax?
Sure, on Newsmax, Salem TV.
Amazing.
Lots of different outlets. And I'll tell you that what we see going on in New Jersey is not just in New Jersey by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, one time I was writing a paper about the grading system and how the grading system is just, you wonder why kids can't add and subtract and why they can't read very well, and it's because of the rigged grading system. And I found in my research that at that time, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, only 8 states required that administrators report the teachers' grades. Now, understand, understand that by federal law, and hopefully Eric will be able to co-sign that for me. But by federal law, teachers are supposed to report the grades that the children are given. But then it states and administrators come in and say, well, no, you have to modify that grade. And if you don't, the administrator can come in and override that teacher's grade. So whenever, you'll hear in the news or you'll hear people giving teachers a really hard time about passing kids, and a lot of times it's not on the teachers. Teachers, where a school is concerned, are the lowest on the totem pole. And even, to be honest, administrators are. It's really the lawmakers, the state, it's the feds that are bullying the schools, threatening them with funding, which such things as what Assemblyman McClellan was just talking about having to refer to a student by one name in the classroom, one gender, and then when you call home, you refer to them by another gender. That literally happened to me, like not making it up. It's a real thing. So it's happening nationally. And like I said, only 8 states passed a law that said that administrators could not change teachers' grades.
Wow.
But it happens all the time where a kid fails and then you look up and they graduated and you're wondering how that happened.
Wow.
It's because the administrator changed the grade and they passed that kid. So it is definitely happening everywhere, and it is because the federal government and the education system as a whole publicly do believe that they are God.
Wow.
And they teach teachers that's the biggest influence on a child's success. They teach teachers that they are the end all, the be all, even though the research does not say that.
Right.
It says parent involvement is what heavily influences a kid's success. But that's not what they teach teachers in the bubble of public education and university, and it's not what they teach them in their professional development either. So they believe the hype, unfortunately.
They believe the hype. I am convinced as a pastor it is a spirit that blinds eyes, and ultimately there's a delusion that seems to have been released from 2020 and on. It has blanketed our land. And then I'm curious, from your perspective, you have spent 30 years in education, Assemblyman Simonson. How have you seen through the decades things change between parents' involvement and curriculum, and even what we were previously teaching our students to what we're teaching them today? Like, take us on that journey.
Yeah, so the COVID thing was an eye-opener, obviously, because I don't think, and then when parents, especially for younger students, they really got to see what was going on in the classroom, because unless you're a volunteer or something in the younger grades, you really don't see what's going on. Now, I will say, and I don't know, I didn't have all the same experience as Melanie has, but we live we're very blessed to live where we live. And our education system here, I'm on the education committee, and the stuff that comes through that committee and some of the other assembly people from, say, northern New Jersey or other areas in New Jersey, it's wild. I mean, it's hard to believe some of the things that they have passed and try to pass. But yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot over the years, and it's that pendulum, right? And we're trying to swing it back the other way. And I think that's happening, but it's a slow process, and it's bills like we're talking about, and many others. But that, you know, like you said, that the parent is the overseer of the family, right? I mean, God is our overseer, we know that. But when it comes to your family, and it's really hard to wrap your head around the fact that, you know, when you put these curriculum standards out, and you put, even like if you go to a first day of school, parents for back to school night, and you look at their, you know, what they put out as their synopsis and what the things that they're going to do for the year, and it's always been, you can go online and see things, and it kind of seems like that stuff went away a little bit. And it's you know, like you said, COVID was great because they started, wait, what book? And they actually got the book and started reading it, and that's when a lot of these, you know, come to Jesus moments happened. Right?
Sure.
And I think that's when the world started, at least, you know, the United States started to wake up and say, hey, wait a minute. This isn't what we're wasting teachers' time. The time that a teacher has is precious with the child, right? You're wasting that time with nonsense that has nothing to do with reading, writing, arithmetic, or whatever, math, science, etc. And we really just got away from what's important.
So the pushback from what I've seen with bills like this from the other side is that if the content of the curriculum is posted on a website or given to the parents, that it potentially could be politicized at that point. But isn't that hypocrisy? When it's kept in the dark is ultimately when it's politicized or corrupted. If there is no foul play, then what is the problem with posting your year or quarterly curriculum so that parents can say, "Ooh, I'm looking into that"? Antoine, what have you experienced with not only pushback, but the proposal in your bill that you're sponsoring? What are they saying in opposition to it?
What opposition is that the teachers don't have time or the administrators don't have time to do these things. But if they read the bill, that they're asked to put it out in the 30 days prior to the school year. So in their summer, as they're starting to come back, and I haven't been a teacher like Commissioner Collette or Assemblyman Simonson, but I've been on the school board, and I know that they prepare. So the summer is used to prepare. Kids are sometimes reading and things of that nature, but it doesn't take much to post that. And you have staff. Staff can post it. It's very easy to do. And if there's any changes, they can change that. So there's times in the day that can happen. So it's not a bear for any teacher or anybody administrator. Obviously, it will be an administrator to post that and let everybody know what the curriculum is going to be. So parents can go over it and see what their kids are going to need to prepare for. And that's the most important thing. Let's prepare our kids for a purpose, not give them gifts to try to hide and teach, people how to hide things. No, let's prepare, let the community know, let the parents know, and then we can move forward. And, you have people on the other side that want to hide.
Let's talk about that. Let's not only talk about the hiding of these forms of curriculum or books. How has there been outright opposition at your guys' level or even at the state level? Correct me if I'm wrong, but have school boards and parents been sued?
Yes.
In order to silence them or in order to distract them? Am I reading these articles wrong? Is the Attorney General, Matt Platkin, actually suing school boards or school districts to what? What's his end game with that?
So the original threat came from the governor. So the governor was going to deny, funding the schools. And then those that decided to vote and want to let their parents know what's going on, the Attorney General comes in and sues or threatens them, and the issue is like, what are you doing? Each township, each school board has the right to do whatever they wish to do. And they're voted in. The governor is voted in. The Attorney General is appointed. So he's doing what the governor wants him to do, but they're hiding behind the law. And that's a problem. And these school boards don't have the money to try to fight the state.
Wow.
And so the threats are real, and you have school boards that are scared, and it's not fair and it's not right.
Anything you want to add to that, Commissioner?
I was thinking about, the ease of getting this done and the fact that, first of all, curriculum is the least of your worries, to be quite honest. You can look at a curriculum and it looks completely benign, but it is what is behind the curriculum in the lessons where the real issues are.
Wow.
And, back when I was teaching, I used to run like a little black ops operation on my own and go and look at curriculum and look at lessons and kind of point out to people and send them screenshots. Hey, did you know this was in this lesson?
Wow.
Were you aware of this? And a lot of times they were not. But I think you could solve it with technology. Teachers have to submit lesson plans every week, usually. All you would have to do is have it post in such a way that there's a view feature. So the teachers are not doing any extra work. You would do it through technology. They're posting lesson plans anyway. And I promise you that is where the issues are. That's where you find out about the green indoctrination. That's where you find out about the critical race theory indoctrination. That's where you find out about the details of the lesson and how your kids are being indoctrinated and fooled. And the reason why they're suing is because they want full control of your kids.
Wow.
They can't have control of your kids. They can't indoctrinate them if you're allowed to, actually look at what they're being taught. And it's the individual teachers that are doing it, the ones that are just so far left, and they do it in the lesson. The
Wow.
curriculum's the least of your worries.
That's what they called the slow march through the institutions, right? Take over those spaces, reach young, pliable minds as early as you possibly can. And the saying goes, it only takes one generation to change the landscape of a nation. And Hitler mastered the art of indoctrination and propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And 90% at least of the German youth were enrolled in some form of state-sponsored education or program. So when you look back on history and you go, how did they arrive there? Let's put that under a microscope. And you realize it didn't happen overnight. It was a slow fade. And one of the threads that I saw when I was studying that period was there was an intentionality to separate church from state. And Hitler told the pastors, you guys stay in your lane, tend to your buildings. Translation, just gather on a Sunday and don't allow your faith to influence your Monday through Saturday, and I'll take care of the rest. And we can say the rest has been history. So we're at a very, in my opinion, very critical moment in time. I believe God has given us mercy with a window of opportunity. I believe believers that are placed as light in a very dark world in different industries and different spaces need to put the pedal to the metal and accelerate. We need to take advantage of where we're at. I said recently in a sermon, again, the picture that was posted of the president signing an executive order, get this, that biological males cannot enter into biological female spaces in sports. And if you remember, he was surrounded by all types of girls and women. And he called them over, and there was this photo op. And I showed my church the picture, and I said, look at this picture. And everyone applauded. And I said, but this is bittersweet. Bitter because we've arrived at a place where the President of the United States had to actually declare an executive order that there are only two genders. Bitter because pastors should have been the ones bringing that up from their pulpits so that the enemy, this is what the enemy does. If we don't touch on truth, the enemy begins to make his way in, and he subtly begins to alter reality. And he has a generation believing that there's gray matter between binary male and female. And that's just one specific lie that has been weaved into young minds. But I said sweet because the president did that, which protected our young girls and women from what I call transgression, because that's what it is. It's a transgression when you are going past biblical boundaries. So you guys are fighting the good fight. I don't think there's any separation between what you guys are doing and what I do. I have the honor of shepherding a flock, but that flock lives in community. That flock lives in South Jersey. That flock is families that send their children into these school systems. And when you guys are willing to put a flashlight on what is happening and do something about it, I want our people to know about it. I don't want my parents to think that they're fighting this battle alone. So talk us through how can, or maybe Assemblyman Simonson, have you seen parents either respond in favor to what you guys are doing, respond in shock that they were completely unaware this was happening, or have you seen parents pushing back against this desire for transparency? What percentage do you feel?
Well, I think, again, where we live is a little different than other places. We're kind of in our own little, you mentioned a bubble, like I know the weather, but we do live in a little bubble. And to Melanie's point, technology has helped a lot in education. Like now, the good teachers do put up Google Classroom and Google Docs, and they'll have it up there for the kids to see. at home or the parents to see on. So that part of it's got better. Now, do they all follow that?
Right.
No. And I think back to something you asked Antoine, I think the other side, the biggest thing, the pushback is deception, right? It's all about deception. And I know Sean Highland, Sean's going to be here tonight. But this, and I'll tell you how they disguise things. And I think Antoine used that word earlier. It's, there was a bill that had so much controversy. It was called the Freedom to Read Act. Like if it didn't pass, we weren't ever going to be able to read again.
Right.
It had nothing to do. It didn't even really have to do with anything in education. All the bill said was that if a media specialist or a librarian, so to speak, if they had those books in the library, that parents couldn't sue the librarian. Now, obviously, a librarian doesn't always have a say. If it's passed by the board, they have to have that book in the library. But anyway, that was the whole bill, was this whole thing with media specialists, and they promoted it, right, as propaganda, Freedom to Read Act. Like, if it didn't pass, they were never going to be able to read again. And then when you find out what actually is in the books that they were called book banning bill. That was another name for you. Yep. And I know because Sean was at many of our hearings at the legislature with the assembly, with the education committee. So it's just bizarre. It's hard to wrap your head around. It's mind-boggling, the propaganda and the deception of, like I said, Freedom to Read Act or book banning bill. We're not banning books. There's no reason, has nothing in our 9 core content standards has anything to do with some of the books that they wanted in the library.
Right.
Even sex ed doesn't teach that stuff. I mean, and I don't even want to go, get in because we only have so much time, but it's just bizarro world that but the deception is, I think when they fight back, they use that in the propaganda as well by naming bills like this that if you don't read into the bill, if you don't get a copy of the bill or look it up yourself and see what actually is in it, a lot of people just go along with it and think it's okay.
That's the deception, right?
Yep.
Yes.
That's
absolutely
the enemy, who's a master illusionist.
The devil in the details, right?
He's in the details, the sleight of hand, and sadly, not many people do their own research or read those bills or what is being said or what's being.
Matt, we have people in our assembly and in the Senate that don't read through those whole bills.
Unbelievable.
Either. I have news for you, unfortunately.
So, Commissioner, here's a very important question. I want some of our parents that listen into this podcast to feel encouraged or given direction. What would you say to them? They feel disconnected. They feel helpless, right? They're aware of the problem. They might show up to a school board meeting. They might go to the mic for that 3 minutes. They might express, but then they're looking at a board that's just staring blankly at them, and they feel like nothing's being done, and their voice is not being heard. What would you say to them?
Number one, I'd say louder. Go to every single meeting. I'm not even kidding.
Keep going.
I'm not kidding. Right. And be a nuisance. And I also would say pay attention to your kids. I would say go on those websites and look at the curriculum. You need to click all the way in, like I said earlier, and look at those lessons. And when you see something you don't like, put it in writing. Schools hate that. Administrators hate that. Put it in writing. If you don't get any satisfaction from the school, write a letter to the editor about what you saw and where you saw it and why you didn't like it. And then talk to more people about it. But be loud, be a nuisance, and talk to your kids. You have to talk to your kids about what their teachers are saying in the classroom, because there's so much stuff, so much indoctrination. And the problem is, there's 2 sides to every story. But, I feel like the liar, Satan,
that's what he is,
presents what his version as the truth.
Yeah.
Whereas people who are on the right, people who are God-fearing people, especially in the classroom, will say, listen, there are 2 sides. Some people believe this, Some people believe that. But that is not what leftists do.
Right.
And that's not what the devil does.
That's
the
right.
devil says, oh, no, this is the truth.
That's right.
What are you talking about, creation? It's only evolution.
Right.
And presents that to children as a truth. And that's highly problematic. So you have to talk to your kids about what they're learning in school and get on those websites and look at the lessons. And if you don't like it, talk about it. To anybody who will listen.
So don't lose heart, parents. Let your voice be heard. Show up. Be present. I think about the importance of what you just said. And I want my listeners to catch this. These issues are not political. They are biblical. They are moral. But more than that, this is a war of worldviews. And the enemy is not presenting multiple options. He's not saying, hey, here's all the information. He is presenting his lies as truth. And he is saying through the people he uses that you can't bring your faith into the public space.
100%.
Yes.
But they can. They can bring their ideology and force it upon children at the child's soul's expense. I get pushback all the time. But you preach the gospel, Pastor. I'm like, I always ask, what do you mean by that? Define what you mean by preach the gospel. And they never have an answer, right? Because it's just a way to sound like I'm holy, but I'm not really engaging the culture as salt and light. Preaching the gospel has implications. If my soul was dead and the gospel reached me and gave me life, my life went from death to life. True? If the gospel is influencing my marriage, then there's going to be an impact upon how I conduct myself as a husband, how my spouse conducts herself as a wife. If the gospel is applied to my family, it's going to influence how I parent my children and how we conduct ourselves in community. Now, keep running that out. If the gospel has an impact on a church, we are going to do what God has called us to do. If the gospel has impact on politicians, they are going to do what God has called them to do. So to say, just preach the gospel without any qualifiers about what they mean by that, the gospel has impact. And I believe the church is supposed to be the conscience of the nation. While we're in our lanes, we are to speak the truth to the power structures of our day and keep them accountable. Romans 13, which is in the Bible, talks about government is in place for really two reasons. Sustain good, right? Law and order, honor those that are doing good, and restrict and punish evil. That's why we have laws. And citizens should fear the government, because if you cross the boundaries that I believe our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence speaks about, the laws of nature and nature's God, that's really just moral law embedded in the hearts and minds of humanity. If you cross over and you start to transgress those boundaries, there's violations. So for schools and the Attorney General and the Governor of New Jersey to transgress those boundaries at the expense of our children and parents, they need to be called out. They need to be held accountable. So if this bill gets enforced, Antoine, talk to us about where we're at with the bill. What's the process? If it gets enforced, what's next?
Okay, so the process is that a bill gets introduced, which has been introduced, then it goes to committee, and it would go to the education committee. Obviously, I would think, and I don't know if it would get second reference, and second reference mean would go to another committee, but it would pass that committee, and then it would go to the floor for an entire body vote, which would mean every assembly person and every senator, if it were to go through that side as well, would vote on it as well. It passes there, then it goes to the governor's desk to be signed. It goes to the governor's desk to be signed, then it becomes law. If it were to become law, then according to that, I think there's this little period where they have time to make the adjustments that the school districts will find out about it, and then it would go into concept, and we would have the fact that the parents would know. The only problem is getting it to the committee to vote. And so, the problem is we're in a minority. And if anybody were to look at that bill, it's all minority owners, which are Republicans, that are on that bill. So we need to get it there. And we can get it. We've seen bills that have gotten passed by all 120 members, and the governor still wouldn't sign it. He would conditionally veto it, or
dies
just
right on his desk.
Right on his desk. So it's just done. So we don't know. We know we have a long way to go, but there's still, opportunity in November for us to get a brand new governor who will see it our way,
Right.
and make sure that it can come to fruition.
Right. That's great. Anything to add to that, Commissioner?
No, that's absolutely true. Everything that that Assemblyman McClellan said about that, and the indoctrination is so deep and so vast and so far and wide. To Assemblyman McClellan's point, you can't even keep up with it at this point. In my opinion, you can't. It's in every lesson. Climate change, anti-gun initiatives. Anything that is anti-Christian, you can't say. I used to teach financial literacy, and I had to explain one time why it was wrong to run scams on people. Literally had to explain and try to do it without using God. And then eventually I was like, listen, I said, whatever higher power you worship, trust me, those moral guidelines and boundaries are put in place for a reason, to protect you and to protect the innocent. And that's why you shouldn't run scams on people. And I was like, I'll let God handle it from there. Yeah. And eventually, and that goes for the parents too, about not being afraid.
Right.
Eventually, God's going to handle it.
That's right.
But you can't be scared. You can't be out here scared. You have to speak the truth and know that at the end of the day, these people don't take care of you. The government doesn't take care of you. God takes care of you. And it's going to be all right if you're standing on principle.
Amen. Yes. I think of Galatians where it says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. He who sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. He who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. So you guys are planting seeds of truth. The hope is that they are watered and we see the growth or the fruit of that work. Assemblyman Simonson, should this level, since you've been in education, you both have, Commissioner and Assemblyman, should this level of transparency that seems to be primarily focused on the curriculum, should it be applied to extracurricular activities? Should this type of transparency between the state and the educational system and how the parents are informed, should that type of transparency be introduced at every level of a school's policies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's to your point earlier with the males playing and female sports. I mean, there's a safety factor, right? But I think the issue is we're believers, all of us here. For some reason, those on the other side that aren't believers, they're hypocrites because they, to them, it's all about God and the Bible, but yet they're trying to force their will, which is non-believer,
right,
onto us.
Right.
So it's like they're always right no matter what. And, it's a shame because the one thing we all have is our faith, and we lean on that and we use that for guidance. And they don't have that.
Right.
They're empty. They're empty souled.
Right.
And it's and then back to Antoine's point with the process, it gets political when we want to find Democrats on the other side of the aisle because they're the majority if we want to get this passed right now. And we do have people in our prayer caucus and things. I know they feel the same way we do about it. That it should be, but will they go against their party? And look, we see it federally too, and it's on both sides.
Right.
But a lot of times it's that. Like I don't want to, they don't have the guts to do what's right because this is a common sense bill. This isn't some crazy idea, right?
Right.
All right. Well, we're putting out there so people know what their kids are learning. That's not a crazy idea. It seems pretty common sense. And we know there are people on the other side of the aisle that feel the same way, but they have to have the guts to step up and vote for it and put it in the committee, first of all, to chair people, and then to actually vote for it. And that's, it's going to take some, and we're working on that too. We talked to the other side. If we could just get a couple, people with faith on the other side of the aisle to join in with us. Like I said, this isn't a crazy, there's not a whole, look at it, it's a short bill if you read it. It's not very long, and it's not very difficult to understand. Some bills are. They're very complex, and there's a lot to them, and there could be 30 pages or 40 pages, but this is, It's a common sense. You would think it's a no-brainer. And you know what? If we went back 20, 30 years and told people that some of these things that are going on, men and women's sports and men in women's bathrooms and locker rooms and some of the stuff in the books that are being forced on not high school kids that probably could handle it, whatever they probably see a lot worse things right out of school, but young kids that are so impressionable,
right?
And then taking that out of the parents' hands and just basically again enforcing their will on young people without the parents having any say in the matter.
That's when you know it's sinister.
Absolutely.
Yes.
When it is going after the youngest
Absolutely.
of the youth. And I'm thinking about the landscape of our day is Romans 1. Mm-hmm. The reason why we call it common sense. And people can't see it that way. It's because what I watch, when something like a common sense approach is presented and people lose their minds, is an indication that they have a lost mind. Okay? That's Romans 1. And God gives man over to the lostness of his mind. The hope is that you can work with colleagues across the aisle, right? But if you watched the president's address to the Congress last night, the sad reality is that pressure must be crushing. When there were moments that were nonpartisan, celebrating victorious stories or heartbroken situations where everyone should have joined in and stood and applauded, and they didn't. And we are no longer the United States of America. We are the divided states.
And Matt, Antoine and I just went through this last week with the governor's address. And we sat there, we didn't clap with the crazy stuff, but
sure,
when the governor did point out in the balcony some of the visitors that he had that were hardworking people for whatever, or cancer survivors or veterans, we got up and clapped and showed the respect. And we still showed respect to the guy. We didn't agree with a lot of stuff, but
sure,
we didn't act crazy and cause a scene. And but like you said, the common sense stuff that we all agreed on, so when you see that stuff like was on TV last night, and I know both sides do it at times. It's just it's hard to get a hold of it and wrap your head around it.
That's why you guys are on the front lines. You are fighting this battle. So I know you guys have somewhere to be tonight. I am so grateful for your time. You have a friend at Landmark Church. And I hope if there's anything that I can do or this community can do we believe, salt to delay the decay of the day by standing in the way. That's what I say to my people all the time. Delay the decay of the day by standing in the way. Stand in the gap. If you don't stand in the gap, that gap one day is going to close in on you. I also say you are the light of the world. We are a reflection of our God. Jesus is the light. And when I position my life to reflect his life, I become light. And by you guys taking a stand and shining light, it's going to bring people of darkness to push back. It's like the light being turned on abruptly when you're in your dark bedroom. Nobody likes that. It takes a while to adjust. The hope is that people begin to open up their eyes, and only the Lord can do that. And I believe we're seeing a revival of sorts where eyes are being opened, and that window, that opportunity is there for the taking. And we're here, as the Bible says, we're here one day, we're gone the next. But while here, I believe with all my heart, we are to be ambassadors of his kingdom. We are sent forth to represent our King of Kings. And some of us are pastors, and some of us are policemen, and some of us are assemblymen, and some of us are commissioners, and some of us are teachers, and some of us are working for the city, or like everyone has their role to play. But I believe if we begin to take God at his word and we allow him to work through us, we can begin to see impact. So what's one thing that you guys, and I'm going to ask each of you to weigh in here, that you wish more people understood about either what you are called to do or this bill that you're sponsoring or anything in your sphere of influence? What do you think they should know, or what do you want them to hear? And I'll start with you, Assemblyman McClellan.
I wish they understood the power of their vote. We get so many people that say, well, I'm not voting, it doesn't matter. your vote does matter, because when you don't vote, we end up like stuff like this,
Right.
And that's a problem. And we get the calls to our offices, we need help with this, and if you would have voted, and you wouldn't have to worry about this. You wouldn't have to worry about, us trying to fight for your unemployment. You wouldn't have to worry about not being able to get into motor vehicle, because those offices would have stayed open through COVID. We would make sure that people are working in their government jobs and not doing stuff from home. So the power of your vote is immense, and people died for that. And you need to make sure you get out there and vote. And when you get out there and vote, that vote has consequences, and those consequences can be good.
That's how we exercise our right. That's our voice. It's one part that we play to impact society and the community where God has allowed us to live. So I echo that same sentiment. I thank you, my brother. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your time. I thank you for being here. Melanie, what say you?
I want to encourage Christians in particular to make sure they become familiar with the government's role and God's role in their lives and really understand it. And then I want them to examine how those principles align with the Bible.
That's right.
That is absolutely key. I think people pick their parties all the time and pick what side of the aisle they want to support without any clue as to how those platforms and principles align with the Bible.
Wow.
And at the end of the day, that's what you really want to ask yourself. That's the question. And I'm not going to say which one is which. I believe that if you look at the Constitution and the Bible, you can only conclude one side of the aisle. That's been my experience. But I encourage everybody to do that, especially professed Christians. There's a crazy stat that 70% of Christians have never read the Bible.
Yeah,
that's insane.
That's a contradiction.
That's crazy. Why are you even a Christian?
Yeah, you can't be.
So you need to make sure that you're doing that. It's extremely important. And have faith that if you're standing on truth, God's going to take care of it.
God's got
it.
Commissioner Melanie Collette, thank you for your time. And you just gave a shameless plug to Landmark Church, because that's what we're doing here. They're being educated and they're being challenged to read the Word of God for themselves. And I believe if the Christian begins to take God at his word, not ours, God designs it, God defines it, stand on his truth, leave the consequences to him. And that's where this story ends. Assemblyman Eric Simonson, sir.
I'm going to pluck a little for both of them. So I think the process, it's frustrating sometimes as an elected official, because people don't know the process. So they're like, maybe something gets passed that is absurd. And they're like, oh, how can you guys let that happen? Well, there's only 26 of us out of 80, right? Antoine and I. And it's, we fight as hard as we can. But then to his point, your vote matters, because if we get more people on the side in our beliefs and the same beliefs we're all talking about, then things change, begin to change. And I think to Melanie's point, I would say to people, just advice that to find a true believer, that person, if you're if you're kind of a lost soul right now, find that Christian that's a true, not only a true believer, but a true practicing Christian, and learn from them and find the Spirit and find out about the Bible. It will change your life, and that, Matt, as well as anybody. I mean, it will change your life more than anything you could ever experience. And with that being said, we will be back to worship with you.
Yes,
we will.
We loved it. We toured all over Cumberland, Cape May, Atlantic County. Try to go to different churches, see different people, and we love it. So God bless you for God's work that you do, and thanks for having us.
Eric, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys more than you know. I hope that you can count on Landmark Church when the time comes to be that voice of truth. We know that we're fighting the battle on many front lines, not just in the political realm, not just in schools and school boards, but families that are beginning to take the Lord at his word and beginning to apply that word, which has changed their lives, to their marriages, their families, their wayward children. And you're beginning to see the Lord do something very unique. So I'm just a humbled broken vessel, grateful to be a part of it. And I'll end by saying this. This is Rechurched Podcast. The entire purpose of this platform is to instigate Christians to be Christian so that we may represent our King of Kings. While on earth, we are citizens of heaven. I'm not trying to make earth heaven, but I'm called to bring heaven to earth. The church is the embassy. We represent our King. I'm his ambassador. Everywhere I go, I take his word with me. I am under his authority. I am on his timeline. I represent everything about his heart. I come with the rights and responsibilities of that kingdom alone, which means I'm going to make an impact where God has placed me until he calls me home. That is the charge. That is the call. We appreciate you guys tuning in, liking, commenting, sharing, and doing whatever you can do to get this message out there, amplify it. Parents need to be encouraged to continue to fight the good fight. People need to get off the sidelines and onto the front lines. Until next time, God bless you guys.